Hi, it's Rhiannon Faith, and I have a special edition tonight, more or less a special request from my oldest, Cheyann. She has asked me to share mom logic, and so there are plenty of mom logic things that I'm sure I've said over the years that she was looking for me to hone in on, but as we talked about it, honestly, neither of us can think of any of them. Except that the thing that came up for her, she said, what about how we have to outgrow the things we learn from our parents, or realize that our parents are not the only sources of truth in the world? And so what I was thinking about is when I was a kid, I don't know why I realized this, because it does defy logic and reason, but I recognized that there was more going on than what I might necessarily learn at home. And so I looked to other adults in my environment, teachers and family friends and other extended family members, and observed what they were doing and how they were interacting and how they responded and what did that look like. And so instead of seeing my family and that nucleus of my mom, dad, my sister at the time as the total of the story of what life should be or look like, I recognized that other people had important information to share. And just because I had seen something be a particular way didn't mean that was the only way it could be done. And there was one time actually when I was little, it was a really strange rude awakening, because before that I had not had any occasion and overlap where I realized this was actually something that occurred. So there was a lot of lead up to what exactly am I talking about. But this little friend of mine, we lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the married student housing, which were apartments that looked almost like the projects. They were pretty rough, but it was wonderful and it was super cheap. And we lived in apartment R7, which I thought was really cool because my name is Rhiannon, and apartment 7, and I was 7 at one point when we lived there. So it was like, this is really all about me, because that's where I was at as a 7-year-old. In any event, my friend from school, and who also lived in the neighborhood, he had some bruises on him, and I thought that was weird, although he was kind of clumsy. And so I had certainly seen him hurt himself on the playground and when we'd been playing outside, so I hadn't really thought about it. His name was Patrick. That doesn't matter to anything else, but I remember this. So he was the sweetest kid, but he would get himself into trouble at school, so I hadn't really thought that much about it. In any event, I got permission. I was allowed to walk over to Patrick's apartment and ask if he could play. And so I went to his door and I said, hey, can you play? And he had answered the door, and I heard his mom yelling at him in the background, and he had a fresh, like massive black eye. And I looked at him and I said, oh my gosh, did you hurt yourself? Did you hit something? And he just gave me this look of horror. And I'm telling you, as a 7-year-old kid, I honestly had no idea that that would happen, that someone's parents would hurt them. Like, that's crazy. Why would that be a thing? Because I'd never seen anything like that from my parents. Of course I had been spanked, because my parents loved me enough to tell me to knock it off, and meant it. And whether you agree with spanking or not is somewhat immaterial. It was fine for me as a child, but for another time. In any event, I never knew anybody who had experienced that kind of situation. And so I really didn't even understand how that was possible. Like, how do your parents love you and this would happen? And I saw this sweet kid that I had known as always being a really sweet kid. And he was so tenderhearted, honestly. And I understood differently that tenderheartedness was just this brokenness that he was experiencing in his home. So that's kind of a dark example. I get that. But this poor young man might have gone his whole life believing that's the extent of what life could look like for him. And I'm sure there are kids who fall into that category. And those can be both positive and negative things. You know, if you've lived a really charmed life and you've never really experienced hardship, you might be completely lost if you find yourself in a position where there isn't a safety net. And a lot of parents go through, I mentioned this before, you know, as a parent, it's a natural inclination. You want to protect your children from harm or hardship. But if I'm running around and bubble wrapping them, they're not actually going to grow or develop or move beyond the station that they're in. And that's a more important objective as a parent. For me, it is, at least. I want my kids to continue to grow in independence and autonomy and capability to go out into the world and meaningfully contribute. And I desire greatly that they would be sold out to Christ and amazing witnesses to those around them, God's love. And so that is definitely what I'm hoping for my children and pray for all the time and hoping to instill in them. And all of those things being equal, I do think it's important that we open our eyes and we see the things that are around us, and we don't see everything simply through the lens of what we've known already, but with that open-mindedness of what else might be out there. And by that I mean strategies for parenting or how you communicate with folks. So let's say you grew up in a house where no one ever talked about their feelings or emotions, and you realize this has started to cost you friendships. You're a teenager or you're an older adult, and you didn't even really recognize that that was a unique dynamic that you had adopted in your childhood. You're a grown-up. You get to choose a different way. You can look at circumstances from a different vantage point. You can ask your friends, how did you get to a place where you feel comfortable communicating your feelings without being ashamed of feeling any particular way or without unraveling because you're having an emotion? What are the strategies you use? I think we would be so much better off as people if we would just stop the facade and be honest with ourselves and with others. Hey, I'm broken. I'm not getting it right all the time. I blow it regularly. I wish that wasn't true, but it's human nature. And so instead of pretending like I have everything together and everything's in this perfect little box, I benefit and those around me benefit from candor and honesty, that I have room to grow. We all have room to grow. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to not have landed in your perfect whatever, because life on earth isn't supposed to be that way. We're not promised perfection. So us expecting it is unrealistic. And honestly, I feel like over and again, that just leads to such disappointment. So if you're out there and no one's ever told you, you're allowed to deviate from what you knew as a child. It's allowed. You can do that. But if you don't know where to start, look to those people that you've put around you. See those qualities or characteristics, behaviors that someone else might be emulating that you could adopt for yourself. So if I see a friend of mine is really savvy with boundaries and self-discipline, I'm going to watch what they do and how they do it, because honestly, those are areas I struggle. I want to be this super disciplined, wake up at 4 a.m. every morning and go out and get it done in the gym or whatever. I think that would be awesome. But honestly, I care significantly more about sleeping, so I don't do those things on a lot of occasions. It's awful. I'm also the person who's going to end up staying late at work because I just want to do a great job and then be irritated with myself. Total boundary issue. Be irritated with myself that I'm tired or worn out, and it's because I've depleted myself more than what was reasonable. I've allowed something to take a greater role than I was prepared to pay. And so instead of being upset about it, I could just make a different choice. So I have this friend, and we haven't talked in a while, but she was amazing. Her name is Mandy. Again, not necessarily relevant, but shout out to you, Mandy. You're incredible. So she has the most disciplined boundaries that I've ever seen. So we both worked in law and healthcare law and research, and she would watch the clock. I'm here to do a job. I'm going to leave when my time is up. And we had an attorney that we worked with, and he came into her office this one day right as she was packing up to go because it was time for her to go. And he wanted to talk to her, and she, without hesitation, all right, well, we'll have to talk about this tomorrow because I'm leaving now. And I was so impressed and honestly jealous. Like, how did you just do that? That was awesome. Because me, I would have, okay, what do we need to talk about? Let's figure it out. How do we get this done? Except I wouldn't have done so with a willing heart to have gone down that road. I'd be irritated that I didn't leave when I needed to or expected to, and was frustrated that my boundary had been crossed. But I let it happen. It's madness. Anyways, I watched how Mandy behaved, and I looked to adopt some of those behaviors for myself. Now, honestly, still, like I said, total work in progress. But it's important to be able to see those things in your friends and your coworkers, and sometimes actually even in people that rub you the wrong way, because sometimes what it is in them is something you wish you had in yourself, or that you're upset that you have in yourself. So maybe give it a second look or a second chance to mull over. What is it then about that situation or that person that just, rubs me the wrong way? Am I upset about that sort of behavior in my own life? Or am I upset that they've gained mastery of something that I still struggle with? Whichever it is, it's somewhere in that category. Most of the time, we're not disliking people for the right reasons, true character flaws or what have you. We're disliking something that we recognize in them that doesn't align with what we were wanting for ourselves. In any event, that's my mom logic, as my daughter would say. I'm sure we'll come up with more of those things because she calls me on a regular basis for that kind of stuff. Hey mom, what do we do about this? Okay, so you're gonna do this and this and this and this. Now, the challenge, of course, is that I'm like Google. I don't know how much she's learning these things because she's just asking me. She's not going out to quest for this information any further than picking up her phone to call me or text me, hey mom, what do we do about this? What do I do when this happens? So for all the moms out there, I know you recognize this, and dads too. There are lots of dads that are the go-to dads. Like, give me the lowdown. Dad, how do I take care of this? What do I do about that? So for all of you wisdom sharers, congratulations. Keep it up. They need the information. And for those people outside of your immediate family, maybe they're not your children, but they're in your sphere of influence. So maybe a child that your child knows, or a niece or nephew, a neighbor, someone at church, whoever that is. If you see somebody, this came up at church too, we were talking about generations, be a part of helping that person on the next leg of the journey. Mentorship is really important. I was talking to one of my staff members the other day about the value that I gained in having professional mentors in the workplace. And I watched and observed what they were doing that I wanted to be like, and what they were doing that I definitely didn't want to be a part of my life. And having those conversations candidly about where they were, or what steps they took to get to where they were today, that was invaluable. And they invested in me by having those conversations. And I'm sure actually many of them don't even recognize what a big deal that was. But in particular, I have to call out to Mary Beth Workus. You are amazing. And I'm so grateful all these years later for every bit of love you poured into me, treating me like one of your sisters, and just sharing wisdom. And Mary Ellen Attridge, you were incredible. And even though you're so intense, I just have wildly wonderful memories of all of the things that you did to support me and teach me and help me to be prepared for the next leg of the journey. So for all those other folks that I didn't mention, you know how much I love you and I appreciate you. But it's a rough transition, I don't know if you're there, when you realize you're the oldest in the room. And it's kind of awkward because I shouldn't be the oldest in the room. I'm just not old enough to be the oldest in the room. But I recognize now that's more and more my job to be part of that, and to mentor and feed into others and help them to see their worth, their value, their opportunities. So if you have someone in your life, I just can't say enough how important it is for you to give them that word of encouragement, to pour into them that mentorship, to listen. Just listen, honestly. Such a big deal. Diane Strand, you were incredible for this. And I was so sad when you moved away because there was so much of this that you did in pouring into me. And I really appreciate that. And so to all of you, you're awesome. Keep up the good work. Don't forget to pour into the next generation. More stories to come.